Christina from Creations with Christina. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to be doing different types of techniques with embossing folders. So for the very first one, I'm going to run through the regular process of a straightforward embossing. I'm using my larger die cutting machine today, so I have a larger platform, and we're going to run through a regular die cutting process. Now this is the process for this particular machine. You want to follow the directions for whatever machine you have. If you have a Big Shot or a Gemini or the We Are Memory Keepers one, whichever machine you have, you want to follow through the process. For this one we need our platform, and then we need our regular acrylic plate, a piece of cardstock, and our embossing folder. So I'm going to stick my cardstock right inside my embossing folder, and we're going to put it between our platform and our acrylic plate, and we're going to run it through our machine. And when we're done, we're going to have a beautifully embossed piece of cardstock. Isn't that pattern adorable? I love this one. So I'm going to move my machine out of the view of the camera just so that I have more room to work and I can show you the different types of techniques. Again, remember to use the directions on your machine on what plates you need to use for the different embossing folders. For our next one, I'm going to use the same embossing folder, and for this one we're not going to emboss a full sheet. What we're going to do is actually take our cardstock and just stick it into our folder halfway, and we're going to just emboss one section of our cardstock. Here's my half embossed piece of cardstock. What I'm going to do now is actually use my scoring platform and create some extra score lines. What we need to do is turn it upside down so that our raised section is on the bottom of our cardstock. And I'm going to line this up so that this particular scoring board has like a double line that's extremely close to each other, so they're really tiny. And I'm going to use this as a guide to creating extra score lines. And I'm going to do one on each of those two areas. And then I've created an extra little dimension to my card. Another way to get more use out of your embossing folders is to take those Slimline embossing folders and do the same technique so you can use it on a regular standard A2 size card. And there we have our half embossed. Again, we're going to bring in our scoreboard and turn it upside down and use those lines again to create an extra score line. And if you don't have that double score line, you could just easily just slide it down a little bit. And now I'm also going to create another score line. I'm going to create one a little closer to the top. And then that gives us a nice little area here that we can add a sentiment, a nice bold die cut or something like that, and also add a little embellishment down the bottom. And now we're going to get messy. So I have another embossing folder here, and this has got a zigzag pattern in it. And I'm going to actually go ahead and ink this up. So depending on which side you ink up, so we have a more filled in side, and then we have our smaller zigzags. And it probably might be hard to see on camera with my background, but I'm going to do the section that has the wider zigzags. And we're going to ink that up. We just want to make sure we get a nice coating on here. And the trick here is to be prepared. So you have your plates and everything ready, but then put your cardstock on the side that you did not ink. Then close your folder. This way you'll have less chances of your cardstock moving around, and we're going to go ahead and run this through our machine now. Now you can see we have the ink in the recessed areas, not in the raised areas. I actually love this technique, but it is a little bit messy, so you just have to remember to clean up your embossing folders. I'm just going to use a baby wipe to wipe it down, and it will, depending on the ink that you use, it will stain your embossing folder, but you know, that comes with crafting. Your stamps get stained, you might as well stain your embossing folders too. Another fun way to add ink to your embossing folders is to actually just take your ink pad after you've done your embossing and just lightly running it over your raised areas, and your ink is going to pick up from there. Really love that look as well. It's a great easy way where if you don't want to stain your folders, you can do that as well. Another fun inking technique is to take white ink onto your dark cardstocks. So this is one that I've already embossed, and I'm just going to take my white ink and we're going to go right over the top of our design here. Now this is a fairly lighter color cardstock. you had a bright red or something like that, you're really going to pick up that white much nicer. But I really, really love that look. So you just have to rub that ink right over the top of your embossed cardstock and you have just a totally new look. So another fun way is to spray your embossing folders. I have this one that has this really pretty focal point in the middle, and I'm going to use that as my area for spraying. Just going to do a little bit of my distress spray. And again, I'm taking my cardstock and putting it on the opposite side of the spray, flipping it over, and running it through my machine. And I just love how it kind of splatters out. So we're going to grab a piece of paper toweling and just wipe up some of that excess. I'm just going to dab it with my paper toweling to kind of pull up some of that extra, because you don't need a whole lot, but I just love how the ink will kind of spray out from the center and move into different areas wherever it wants to go. I just think that's a fun way to do an interesting background on a card. So the next one we're going to do is a tone-on-tone look. I'm going to use my embossing ink. Now you want to make sure that you're using one that's either brand new or just re-inked, because embossing ink is a little bit thicker and you really have to apply a lot of pressure. So you want to make sure your ink pad has got a lot of ink in it. And we're just going to tap this over our embossing folder, and we don't want to press too hard because we don't want to go into the grooves of the embossing folder, because we'll get that transfer onto our cardstock. And before I run my embossing folder, because I'm going to show you two techniques in one, I'm going to take my cardstock and I'm going to add a little bit of my anti-static powder. This is what you use when you're using embossing powders. I'm going to use this so that I can pull up any oils and that the Versamark ink only sticks to the areas that I want it to. Because I'm going to show you two techniques in one here. We're going to add our cardstock to our folder, and then we're going to run this through our die cutting machine. So now you can see that our cardstock has picked up the embossing ink into the grooves, and you can see I wasn't totally perfect on that one. What we could do is just let this dry, and you can leave it like this, or you can add an embossing powder. So what we're going to do is actually add some embossing powder to part of this. Now we can leave this as is and let us have a more watercolored and matte look, or we can add a white or clear embossing powder or any color embossing powder that you want. And now I'm just going to go ahead and heat set it. There we go. So now I have a clear embossing powder, which gives it a little bit of a shine. I personally prefer the matte look, which is just the embossing ink and letting it dry into the cardstock. And last but not least, you don't have to just use cardstock. Let's run a piece of vellum through and see what happens. And we end up with a beautifully embossed piece of vellum. That makes a great background on cards and so on. I really love the vellum. Another one is acetate. So I just have a sheet of acetate here. You can use transparency film if you have that. You can use packaging from products that you've ordered. And there's so many different, places where you can get acetate from. When you run a piece of acetate through your embossing machine, you might want to run it through twice or even add a little piece of cardstock just to help get that texture into the acetate. And there we go. Let me find a piece of cardstock here that we can just use to show you the design. So you can see that it picked up that fun pattern. And you can even use this. This would make a great backing for some shaker cards. So if you emboss your acetate before making your shaker card, you can actually get some really cool designs with that as well. Just to go over what we did today, we have our regular embossing, which is our cardstock, just embossed with our embossing folder. We took a piece of white cardstock and embossed that just on half of the page, and then added some score lines with our scoreboard. We also took a Slimline card, or Slimline folder, to make a standard A2 size card by giving a half of a score line, or half of the embossing down at the bottom, and some additional score lines using our scoreboard. This one's probably my favorite. I think I'm going to set that one aside so I can make a card with that really soon. We also did the tone-on-tone technique, which is using the Versamark ink into our embossing folder. We also used it to do some clear embossing powder, but again, you can use any color embossing powder that you want. Using our Distress Oxide sprays gave a unique background. We also added some ink to our embossing folder to create a unique background. We ran our ink over an already embossed piece of cardstock to catch those raised areas with our ink pad. We also did it with a white ink on a darker colored cardstock. And then we have our my personal favorite, which is the vellum, that is embossed with one of my favorite embossing folders. And then using a piece of acetate, let me try to get that light to catch that, so that we can use this for a shaker card front or even just a fun background. There are so many other fun techniques that you can do with embossing folders. These are just a few. I hope you found today's video helpful and that it reminded you of different ways that you can use your embossing folder, or you learned some new ways. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.